Good morning. Welcome to Living Waters, Falling Deeper in Love with God's Word. I am one of your hosts, Lauren Cruz.
And I am Stephanie Pavlantos. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
I think we're a little lagging today. We're both a little frozen and cold, and we're just we didn't talk much before the show.
I
And
know.
we're just kind of quiet today, but thank you for joining us. And if you are new to our show and our programming on Tuesdays, we have been working through the book Strength of a Woman, Why You Are, Proverbs 31. It is my book, and I'm the author of that. And we're doing about 2 chapters or so a week, and we're just kind of moving along Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. And we're going to continue on that today. And I have, if you're interested in joining us, it is not something that you have missed anything previous. You're welcome to jump in and start with each verse, because really each verse we relate it to a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so you can start fresh with each verse. Right. The books are available through Amazon. And also I am fulfilling them through my website at laurencruz.com. And I know Gina joined us last week, and I stuck one in the mail to her yesterday. So I apologize, Gina, if you're watching today, that it's not going to get to you until later this week. So
yeah, well,
you can catch up with us.
Yeah, and I have a different background than usual because I am in South Carolina instead of Northeast Ohio. So
that's right.
I'm spending time down here for a little bit. And so, yeah. And this book has been great. So I have to admit that
thank you.
It has been teaching me about the importance of praying for my spouse, and very specifically, praying very specifically, because it's important that, just while this is talking about our strength, the strength that we have to lift up our husbands and pray for them and for protection and for wisdom and all of those things. So it's very it's given me a lot to think about and kind of ruminate with,
Well, and I do want to just encourage folks that if you're, interested in reading through that information, it definitely is directed towards a wife. I mean, that is the godly wife and the yoking of the marriage and everything. However, I always tell folks, when you're reading through the Old Testament, including Proverbs 31, how is Yeshua, how is Messiah revealed, and how does that affect us? Not only as wives, but as the bride of Christ and as the body of Christ. And so a lot of the information that we're talking about obviously is going to apply to a wife and a family and your children. And but think about your circle of influence. Think about how you act as a part of the bride of Christ. And so whether you're married, single, divorced, widowed, children or no children, there's definitely information in here that is vital to our positions as women. Really, it's our position as a woman. So all right, so and she kind of talked a little bit about praying for your husband. And today's 2 letters, the 2 letters that we're going to work on today, are Zion and Het, and they relate to Proverbs 31, 16 and 17. And I've mentioned this before, the sections of Proverbs 31 Proverbs 31 goes through sections. And so we've seen the first section of a family marriage being established, a home is established, and then it kind of goes into how she is a benefit and works within her family, portioning time, talents to her family. And then really how she has to behave as she leaves the door to her home and she has to begin to interact with the world. And we're kind of along those lines a little bit. But now we're kind of taking a turn, and we're really going to start looking at 2 verses that very much promote that military strength theme, the military theme. There's a lot of military action that is involved in these 2 verses. So I'll go ahead and read the 2 and kind of set the tone and see where we are today. So it's Proverbs 31, 16 and 17. She considers a field and buys it, and from her earnings she plants a vineyard. Verse 17, she girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. So 17, you can kind of see like, okay, maybe I can see a little bit about that with, kind of spiritual warfare, military theme. But, what does planting a garden or planting a vineyard have anything to do with, physical strength or spiritual warfare, anything like that? So, this verse starts with the letter Zion. And if you were to look at the letter written in Hebrew, it kind of looks like a sword. You kind of can see the little hilt, and then it's got like the dagger that goes down the middle of it. And so, it kind of looks a little bit like a sword. It is a word. This letter is used in words that really represent power and strength. And I'll look at page 63. It says, what do the following words have in common? Seed, which, you read that and you're like, I don't know. Seed, lightning bolt, protection, strength, gossip, and you're like, those are not words that seem to go together. But the roots of those words all contain the letter Zion, and they all reference power and strength. And so if you look at a seed, that's the power of new life.
Right.
Lightning bolt, that's a good one. That's a little more obvious, but protection, strength, gossip. Gossip has the power to destroy.
Right.
And so, we see definitely links to Zion in that one. So, and I also made a mention, and I thought this was interesting when I found it in the research, but if you trace the generations between Adam, if you count through 7 generations, the 7th generation is in Tubal Cain era. And the Bible actually says that that's the time frame that they began to forge bronze and iron. And so number 7, and by the way, Zion is the Hebrew number 7 as well. And so you see a little bit of a relation there to forging weapons and, using iron. And the word enemy and stranger is also a word that they both relate to. If you look at the word pictures of the letters, they both kind of come to the imagery of a man of the sword or a man of the weapon. And so enemy, I can kind of understand that, like he's going to attack me, but if you are being attacked, you want your friend behind you also carrying a sword. So so that kind of just sets the understanding of Zion and what it offers us. So good morning, Dara.
Good morning.
Yeah, I see you joining us this morning. That's good. All right. So I wanted the word that begins the verse, because every verse begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but it is the word Zamen. And it does begin with the Zion, and it definitely has an understanding of consider. We translate it as consider. So we see she considers a field and she buys it. Well, the trick here is it's not just like I'm looking at something and I'm going to buy it. Like my husband loves to scroll and look at old cars and campers, and he's always looking at, whenever he's like in shopping for a new car, he considers, he looks through all these different ads on the buyer's lists and everything, and he goes through and considers them. This is a little stronger of a word. It really kind of represents that recon action of a warrior, of a soldier. And, if you've been in the military, they train you to really observe the details. Like, don't overlook the details. Don't, when you're scanning something and when you're looking and observing what's going on, or you're looking at the gear that you're working with, they really train you to look at the details of things so that you don't miss something. And what you're looking for is anything that might prevent you from being successful. So that's, the purpose of recon. And so she's considering a field. She's looking at this field and she's trying to decide, is there something within this field that's going to prevent me from being fruitful? because that's our goal, right? To be fruitful.
Right.
And so that's more along the lines of what that word means. So she's doing recon. She's doing recon for this field, and it's trying to identify what might prevent the growth.
Mm.
And so the story that I attached to this chapter is a story of a friend of mine that was a missionary in another country, and we'll probably name the country, but even as I was interviewing her, she couldn't specifically name the country because there's still people there that she worked with, and if there was a link or anything, she doesn't want to endanger them.
Right.
When we published the book, she's like, I can't name this country, but she definitely talks about how it's a Middle Eastern country, and then she also shared, as Kelly was planted in this Eastern country, she really didn't like it, and I kind of talk a little bit about how, she actually prayed. She prayed to be a missionary. They walked through the process, putting out a fleece of like, God, is this your will for us? And as long as, they kept getting the affirmative answers, that they would just take the next step and take the next step. And, anytime they received a no, that they would, all right, we're misinterpreting things. We would slow. Well, they ended up on mission. They got assigned to an Eastern city, and she hated it. She absolutely hated it. She did not, when you are assigned as a missionary through this particular organization, the first thing you do is you go through language class. And so, she was engrossed in going through English language class, not just her entire family. So when she and her husband moved there, they had young kids. I mean, her kids were less than junior high and younger, right? So, because I had her, we talk about her daughter in the class, and when they came back on furlough, I was actually her teacher for the year. So
fun.
I had her when she was in 8th grade. So that means she was in the city younger, at a younger age, 8th grade. So just to understand, but, she would share that she would sit at her kitchen and look out over this city, and she didn't like them. And she would pray the Psalms every day, and she would pray them every month. She would pray through the entire book of Psalms. And her favorite Psalm that she read was Psalm 32:31, and it said, "Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was in a besieged city." And so that's a clue. And I'm gonna share something with you, because I have this I have a journaling Bible that I enjoy journaling, doing the art part of Bible journaling. And at one time I had a traveling journal Bible that I would send out to all my friends. I mean, I mailed it across the country, and they would pick their favorite verse, and they would journal about it, but add the artwork that goes to it, and you'll understand when I show it to you. But this is so you can get a clue where she was stationed. I'll show you. I sent this to her, and this is what she drew for me, so you can have a clue where she was living, and I think it'll definitely.
Oh yeah. Oh cool. That's beautiful though.
Yeah, so she highlighted that verse and drew
Good
that
morning,
picture.
Lori.
Yeah, and drew the picture so that
that's pretty cool.
We could relate it to where she was.
Yeah, I wanted to back up a little bit on 64.
Yeah.
You actually talk about, when you're talking about Kelly, that, how she felt in the church, because she's like, she wanted to be part of this particular church, but she was betrayed, and she felt, what was the word here? Not just betrayed.
She had
isolated.
a hard time trusting and isolating. Yeah.
And
She actually said, I expected Christians to treat each other differently, but some displayed a very worldly response. And I know we've talked about, how we've interacted with challenges
Yes,
that we have faced
struggles,
through the
yes.
church. Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's interesting because, in my own life, and I can see that even in hers, that it was a struggle within the church because the struggle outside might draw you inside the church, but the
Mhm.
struggle in the church draws you to God,
Right,
draws you to Jesus because you're
right,
like, okay, I have no one left.
right.
These people I trusted in the church now, I realized, somewhere along the line, I can't trust somebody. I don't feel like I can trust anybody. So then that draws you closer to Jesus. And I think I relate to that because, I think what I have to always remind myself is the parable of the wheat and the tares.
Mhm.
These tares are planted right along with us,
Right.
weeds, and they're not producing any fruit.
Mhm.
We're like the world, and we have them in every church. You have to know the difference, I guess. You have to have some, and when you come and you start finding yourself, coming in contact as far as having the issues, like
Mhm.
this, then you have to go and seek God more.
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said is really a great theme for not only this chapter but the next one too. When we're facing these disappointments in
Mhm,
our surroundings or people or whatever, the only hope is to turn to God, and really that's what she and her family did.
mhm,
I love she kind of added a little story about one of her daughters.
mhm,
Her name is Hannah, and Hannah was young, so she was a teenager, 13, 14, when 12 when she was living in that city, and she would sit at language class. Their family would sit at language class. Kelly would be in one room, and she would just hear this boom, thud, thud, and it was her daughter just sitting there banging her head on her dresser because she's just like, I don't want to learn this language. I am
right,
miserable, and like, why would God do this to me? Like, God must obviously not love me
mm,
because look what they're making. Look what He's making us do,
right,
and I read this. I've been on a big pity party the last couple of days. I mean, I'll be real honest. Um, and I wanted to kind of read something that struck me when I reread this morning. And I'm like, like when your own words make you cry,
I
it's just,
know.
yeah, it's a whole different thing. But I said, um, you know, her daughter was able to help in the ministry. And once my daughter discovered her purpose for suffering, she could endure. Today, she never looks at anything from her life as that time God did to me, but
Mhm,
instead, that time God did for me. And so, by participating in the activities of their mission work, Hannah, the daughter, was like able to understand, okay, like now I understand this suffering,
right,
and now I understand this hard time. There's a purpose for it, and I
mhm,
can almost survive, if I know the purpose. you know
right.
have you, like Kelly, faced a time when you felt as though you were bumbling through God's plan, or worse, failing Him? How does knowing that this may actually be a part of God's plan change your perspective? The good, the bad, and the ugly can all be used by
Mhm,
Him.
mhm,
I've never lived in a foreign country, but I understand, finding a new church and planting myself. And this is kind
right,
of the lesson here. If you're going to perceive a vineyard, you're basically
mhm,
trying to decide, where do you think you can be most fruitful? And
right,
so, where am I going to plant myself? Where am I going to plant my kids? Where am I going to plant what activities? If I'm not married and, have children, then what activities am I going to plant myself in to be
mhm,
most fruitful? Because over and over again, the Bible tells us to be fruitful. Well, how often do we stop and take a soil sample before
yes,
we sink in those roots? And I said to this, um, I've never done nothing. I've never experienced soil testing like Kelly faced, because boy, was she testing some soil. But I often quit when things become hard. Kelly's story makes me question if perhaps I have missed some kind of life changing lesson. or a blessing.
Mhm.
And so, we're quick to volunteer and jump in and, leave a church or join
Right.
a church or get on a committee or take on another responsibility or teach a class or,
Mhm.
whatever. But, do we really take the time to pause and to test the soil and to do
Mhm.
that soil sample? Because the goal is to be the most fruitful.
Uh-huh. And it's easy to leave when things get hassle,
Hard.
become a
Yeah.
hassle and become, even if they're just a hassle,
Yeah.
even if they're not terribly difficult, but even how much more so if they're difficult, if
Yeah.
they're painful, and
This must
just
mean
go.
it can't be God's will. Like, I'm
Right.
miserable,
Right.
But,
Exactly. I
maybe
mean,
there's training or blessing.
mhm. I
Yeah.
had a job for 2 years that I hated,
Oh.
and then my boss was so difficult
Mhm.
and purposely did things to make it more difficult. I mean, she
Mm.
was very active in making it as difficult for me as she could,
Mhm.
and then I got a job. I got a new job after a year. Actually, I got it, let's just say not a job, but a job offer.
Mhm.
And I prayed, it's like, Lord, I got a job offer. I'm going to take it. And the Lord's like, no.
Ah!
And I'm like, what do you mean,
What
no?
do you mean, no?
Really? I was like, why in the world would you want me to stay here?
Mhm.
But boy, I couldn't take it. I just felt no peace about it. I felt like it wasn't meant for me.
Yeah.
But I waited it out. I was there for 2 years total.
Mm.
But then at the end of the 2 years, I got a job within 6 weeks of quitting that job. I mean, it was like the Lord just said, okay, it's time.
Right.
And I quit, gave him my 2 weeks notice, got a job within 6 weeks, and it was the best job.
Oh,
But I
that's
needed 2 years of experience to get that job.
there you go.
And, the
If
Lord
you had
knew
quit
that.
too soon,
Mhm.
you wouldn't have been able to do the
Right.
job. Yeah.
So you never know why,
You
but
never know. Yeah, and Kelly was just a great reminder of,
mhm,
he the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's gonna
right.
use it all, and there's a reason behind it. And, the times in the wilderness, we talked about seed, that word seed, and this really isn't even in the book that much, but, a seed is, hope, right? Because we
Mhm,
think of hope, especially now in the springtime. We're all still freezing. I was joking with Stephanie, like in Florida, we have our second winter right now
mhm,
because it's colder than it's ever been. And I planted all my seeds, and I'm like really worried if I'm going to kill them off with this cold weather or if they're going to, bloom. And
mhm,
so, but that seed has a time of dormancy.
mhm,
Or if you have perennials in your yard, those seeds die, those plants die back
mhm,
before they're able to bloom again. And honestly, that cold is what triggers the growth, and so,
mhm,
if we feel like we've had a seed of hope that we have planted somewhere and it's
right.
just not being fruitful and it's just laying, it's still buried. It's not that it's
Mhm,
buried and it's dead and it's never going to be worthwhile, but it perhaps it's
mhm.
dormant for a time.
Well,
Or
yeah, sorry. Think
no,
of a seed. It's planted in the darkness. It's planted in maybe even hard soil
yeah,
that it has to find its way up,
right,
and up out of the soil in
right.
the dark and cold. But the thing
And the
is,
hard soil. I thought that was
yeah,
a good choice of words because
yeah,
that seed is pushing through some very difficult obstacles.
mhm,
And,
yeah,
where are we planting and
mhm.
what kind of obstacles are we pushing through to
Right.
come to
And
fruition?
even you think of if you've ever grown seeds indoors, which we do up in
Mhm,
Ohio a lot
mhm.
because we have to start them if we want them to grow
Right.
longer, then we start them indoors. Well, how many times have you wanted to like remove the soil because you see it coming up? You see
Yeah,
like the top of it and that
yeah.
leaf wants to come up.
And help it
So
out.
you go and it's like, I'll just remove some of that soil. But it
Yeah.
has to do that. It has to do that. It has
Okay,
to
this
work
totally made
through
me think
there.
of chickens too. Like when they peck out, you're not supposed to help them.
Right, and
Is it
eggs, yeah, when they're in
Yeah,
eggs,
when
yeah,
you hatch eggs. Yeah.
yeah, you're
Uh,
right, 'cause and butterflies, all of those, they have to
yeah,
go through that
can't help them.
difficulty because
Mhm.
it strengthens them to get
Right,
through there.
right.
So, yeah, good
Yep.
point.
Yep. Well, the other reference with Zion is a sword. And, we have a sword as part of our spiritual armor, the sword of the Spirit. And everybody thinks that it's this big broad sword. When you look at a picture of someone with the spiritual armor, you always see this great gladiator and he's wielding this big broadsword, but actually the word that is used is a very small sword.
Dagger like thing,
Yeah,
like a
it's like a little dagger, two-edged. It is a two-edged dagger, but what that means is you have to get up close and personal, and it's hand-to-hand
right.
combat. It's not a big sword fight, I'll poke you from far away. You're up close and personal, and you are in a hand-to-hand
Yes.
combat. And so, that's something to consider when we're dealing with these very difficult fields that we find ourselves planted in. We're going to have some up close and personal combat. But also, let's take a look, because in some versions of the Bible, it says that she plants a vineyard. And so a vineyard is something that must be pruned to be to bring the most benefit. And so, because if you just let those vines go, a wild vine, you could have a cluster of grapes that are wrapped in, vines, and you can never get to it, or they're going to rot on the vine. You have to look for rot. You have to cut it off. You have to train the vines to follow the trellises.
And they only grow on new vines.
Yeah.
Grapes only grow on new vines. So if you don't cut back the old ones,
then you're going to not force that growth. The other thing I understood too is if where you plant your grapes makes a difference too, because you actually want dry, more arid conditions, because then you'll have a smaller, more robust, flavorful grape versus an area that has a lot of rain. You're going to get these big, fat, plump grapes, but the flavor is completely diluted. And so think about that as we encounter things as well. We've got to be pruned. There's and it hurts. We don't enjoy that. And so, you've got to cut away the old so that we can produce the new. But also, if we are in a time of dry period, that's when we're going to become most flavorful, most fruitful. And I think you said it very well. It's because we turn back to our vine keeper. We trust the process of the vine keeper, versus when we're fat, plump, and happy, we're diluted. We tend to get a little more diluted in our areas.
And it's so interesting, because that word, even in John 15, where it talks about pruning, and you just mentioned that pruning, but the word pruning means cleansing.
Right.
And then if you think of, I followed this word through scripture, and it's also in the Beatitudes. Blessed is the pure in heart, where the word pure is the same word as prune and cleanse. And so it all goes back to the heart. So what is God doing? Jesus is pruning us to cleanse us and get rid of all the old stuff and the junk and the dead growth and whatever, so that we can sprout new vines and new fruit. And
totally. I'm going down the rabbit trail here, but you made me think of something when you said the cleansing. Okay, in the book of Daniel, and this is only because I have to write an article on Daniel, so I'm talking, but I've been engrossed in the book of Daniel. The word trust is only in the book of Daniel one time, and it's when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out of the fiery furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar says to him, he sent ministering spirits to you, and you trust in him. And that's the only time the word trust is in the book. And if you follow that book, if you look it up, it means cleansing, and it means the ministerial work of the priest, and it really relates to labor. And I'm like, isn't that what pruning is we're trusting God to, cut away the dead, and so that we can be the most, most fruitful for him.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
It's interesting. There's so many connections.
Yeah, there
So,
are. It's very interesting. And Jen wrote here,
yeah, thank you.
being connected to the vine is where holy transformation comes
That's
from. And
right.
that's
I mean, it's the
very
only way
true.
we're going to be transformed. And he is
Hmm.
definitely the vine that and
Hmm.
he's the gardener and the tender. So the
Hmm.
vine keeper. So
And
we can
Dar had
trust
written this.
him.
So new perspective, and she just said, I tend to
Easy.
pick and choose my perspective from fear and level of difficulty. And you're
Don't we
right.
all though, Dar?
Yeah, we
I
do.
mean, if we're really, really honest with ourselves, we kind of look for, if it's meant to be, it's going to just fall into place and be
It's going to be
easy.
easy. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
going to be easy. But no,
yeah.
sometimes, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
not.
she made the point when Kelly was interviewing when I was interviewing, she made the point like I was miserable and I prayed for that. Like I spent years, praying for that and then here I am miserable and I have no one to blame but ourselves. But
Uh-huh.
they ended up doing fine. They're now off the mission. They were moved from there to they went to Vienna, which I mean, like, boy, that's a blessing after being where you were stationed
Yeah,
before.
I
And they
know.
loved, spending time in Vienna. And now they're
Hmm.
all back in the States. And
And when you're in a close country, boy, I mean,
yeah.
it's hard and it can be scary because you
Yeah. And
don't
well,
know
she
what's going
talked
to
a little
happen.
bit about that. She had to have a balance between telling their kids, like,
Hmm.
we are in danger, but not scaring them to death.
Yeah.
And, things like teaching their kids to not speak English when they're on the streets. um or not to if people speak to you in Russian. Oop, I said the word. They were in Russia. If people speak to you, like, don't respond, act like you don't know the language, and so because it was easier just to be a tourist versus someone who actually
Mm,
lived there.
right.
They also at one point they had all their documents taken away from them. The government took their documents, and so they're
Wow.
terrified because, like, they could disappear and no one would ever know, and could not be found because
Oh,
the
yeah.
documents are gone.
Right.
They always carried, like, they never left their documents in the home when they left their homes. They carried everything with them and money because if they ever had to make a quick escape, they had to have a plan
Hmm.
B to just leave everything they have and just escape.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
So,
it's true. Well, yeah, what Jen is saying again. She said that I was saying on Sunday that trees do not ask for permission to change. They simply change, and it's going through the seasons
right.
of change that bear fruit. Yeah,
Right.
because if they didn't go through a time of losing their leaves
Yep.
and being dormant,
Right.
all those things help us then bear good fruit, and
That's right.
especially, I mean, obviously trees too. So
That's right. All right. Well, we'll move on.
yeah.
We'll get to Het, and the next verse is this one we can kind of see, like, oh, okay, I can see how that might be related to military because it talks
Hmm.
about how she girds herself with strength, makes her arms strong. And Het is a letter that is very similar to hey. We talked about hey, I think last week. Except hey has a little opening in the top left corner. Het does not. And the word picture for het is offense.
Mm.
Um, and so if you've ever gone, I'm sure you have prayed this prayer, please God, put a hedge of protection around my family. That's praying for het. You're praying for that protection.
Hmm.
Let me see what Dar says. I don't remember which country it was. My friend's orange shirt, as they could be shot. Well, I mean, you never know. You don't know what the
Yeah.
locals are. Yeah. So that's interesting. That would be very
Yeah, it is. That's scary.
yeah. So het is that fence or hedge or wall. So we see that it's also related to hay because hay is just that soft whisper and that's the softness of the Holy Spirit. Het, when you say it, it's just you're
Hmm.
clearing your throat and it's a very strong word. where hay relates to the inhale, like the breathing of the Holy Spirit, het relates to the exhale and the force and the power and the strength. And so it is often used in words, like exhale, vomit. I think the word vomit is in the word, is in het is in the word vomit in Hebrew. And so it's very, it relates to very powerful words of exhale. And so, that strong strength imagery definitely goes to it. So we're going to continue with the thought on that, but I wanted to read to you a different translation. And I think this one actually is one of my favorite translations of this verse, and it's from the Message. And it says, first thing in the morning, she dresses for work, rolls up her sleeves, and she's eager to get started. And so that, I think, versus, makes her arms strong and everything. A lot of people read that and like, I don't want to go to the gym. Well, it's not that.
Yeah,
it's not
right.
that strong. It's, rolling up your sleeves, girding yourself. We talk a little bit about the word gird is in there. And that means strapping on. I'm going to turn my page here. It means to strap on, to ball up the hems of your clothing and to strap on a sword. And so we see just the letter before is that sword. And so what is she doing? She's making her arm strong. She's girding herself. She's strapping on that sword of the Spirit. She's strapping on the sword because she knows that she needs to roll up her sleeves, gird herself.
And I also read that, the men wore robes. They wore longer. You didn't necessarily always wear short things. And so part of the girding was when they had this big belt on, they would take their longer clothing, robes, whatever it was, and then stick it into the thing so that it would free up their legs.
Right.
So they
could run and not get entangled and not trip and all of that. So we use the phrase or the idiom, I need to roll up my sleeves. And so we understand that today as, I'm getting ready to work, or I'm getting ready to fight, a terrible thought my brain just totally went to. I'm a high school teacher, and the running joke is if the girls take the earrings out, they're about to fight, so because they don't want their earrings ripped out. So that's like a telltale sign that something's about to go down in the classroom when you see the girls taking their earrings out. So they're rolling up their sleeves or taking their earrings out because they're about to, we're gonna handle something very, with force. And so that's kind of the idea. I'm sorry.
I can understand that, but that's
well, the story that I related this letter to is actually Terry and Brad. And Brad had an affair. And very early on in their marriage, before they had children, Terry did share that it was, it was a one-time thing. He totally came to her and confessed. It was a very bad mistake. And, she's like, and it was with her friend. Like it was a couple that they were friends with. So not only had her husband betrayed her with an affair, but a lot of us will turn to our friends and, commiserate with our friends. She couldn't because it was her that the affair happened with. And so Dar says, I remember the day.
I know.
Yeah, it's true. So we talked a little bit about that, and Terry made an amazing, when I was talking to her and she was kind of giving me her story. She said this statement, and I was like, it kind of just set me back. She said, I cried out to God. Why? Like, why? And this is something I wanted to make a point of. And you kind of see the theme with Kelly, with Terry, and you're going to see it a little bit later too. These are godly Christian women, and they thought because they were godly Christian women that they would be spared these difficult times. And so Terry's like, God, God, why? So many times I cried out, why? My husband had a relationship with the Lord. He knew better. And one day, with the affair long past, Terry felt the Lord impress upon her spirit. The foundation was strong. but your walls were not high enough.
Mm.
And that revelation triggered the healing in their marriage. And she really began to understand building that wall of protection even around your marriage. And you know, you may have a belief, and you may have a Christian based marriage, you know, and you may have been raised in a Christian home, and you know, that's only your foundation, right? And it's important because we have to have that foundation of Christ. Even I put the verse in, you know, like nothing is stronger than your foundation of Christ, and everything must be founded on Christ. But if your walls are weak, then you're going to be susceptible to attack. And I talked a little bit about how when the Israelites returned, and they returned to Jerusalem, and they saw the state of the city, the first thing they began to work on was the walls. And everybody, they all girded themselves. And it says, if you read through Ezra and read through some of the other
Nehemiah.
stories, Nehemiah and Ezra, you know, it talks about how the men girded themselves, and the men and the women worked on the wall. And in one hand, they built and worked with the bricks, and in the other hand, they held a sword. Because they understood that they were in a weakened situation, right? They were very vulnerable to attack. The walls were weakened. They're distracted because they're trying to build the walls, and they knew the importance of holding the sword in the other hand. And so,
and you know, I also read, because it's not walls, but it's even the armor. We think of armor, but if your armor is defective, I read where, you know, when, you know, special forces that, you know, they're going out, they check each other's armor to make sure that it's in place. There's no places of weakness and all
vulnerability.
that.
Right. Yeah. Do I have it on properly?
And the same with our walls. If our walls have places that are crumbling or places of vulnerability, then you need people. But, you know, but think about us. We're not very open to people telling us where our vulnerabilities are. You know, that we're not very open to people saying, you know, this is a place where Satan can attack you if you don't find healing there. This is a place where if you don't get this under control, Satan can use this against you and other people. You know, we don't want to hear that, but then we're afraid to say it because we might get rejected for saying it, or, you know, but we should be doing that very thing and listening. And,
so not only soil testing, but checking the wall and checking the armor to make sure we're not not only being fruitful, but not vulnerable to attack. And the city walls, I mean, that was the most important. Like, they built the city walls before they started building the temple. You know, if you look through it, you know, they wanted that city wall so that they can begin to inhabit the, you know, and rebuild everything else, but they needed that protection.
Without that protection, no matter what they did inside, was vulnerable.
Made no difference. So the second half of the verse, it talks about how she makes her arms strong. And there's actually several words for strong in Hebrew. We talked about chayil, how this passage starts with the word chayil, which is strong, women of strength. But this particular word is the word amet. And it means strong, but it also means to be alert. It's a mental strength, and it means to be determined and set. And so in having amet, you know, it's kind of exactly what you were saying. You know, you can build your walls, but unless you are checking out the details and you're mentally alert and you understand everything that's involved with it, it's a false sense of security and strength, for sure. I love the word amet. It's the same word that's used in the phrase strong and courageous, to be strong and courageous. And so, and amet is, we can be strong. If you look at the pictographics imageries of that letter, it's Aleph, which is often represents God. And then Mem is water, and water and chaos. And so and then the TS sound is the Zadi, the TZ sound, and that's a hook. And so our strength is because we have God, we're attached to God. That's courageous, attaching to God, so that in the chaos, we're not pulled and swept away. We're not hooked and pulled away.
Mm.
That's what strength is, you know. So,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
that's the strength that we can only get from God. You know, it's that peace in the chaos, you know, and that's a strength that we can definitely draw from. So,
Right.
yeah. The other part that I really, really loved about Terry and Brad's story is, you know, Terry was she was very open about how she really needed to forgive her husband and what that forgiveness looked like. And she said, you know, I thought if I followed the rules and if I followed this godly life, then, and I would check off these boxes. And I didn't want my husband to I didn't want to set him up either. Like, if you do this every day, check, you know, then you've proven your faithfulness to me and I can trust you again. She's like, I either had to trust him and God, or I couldn't sit there and hold, you know, keep a score. I couldn't keep a score every day. It's exhausting. I just can't do it. She said, however, she really began to feel like, you know, as she walked through this process of trusting her and God, because she's trusting God, she really felt like a fragile new lamb. And she really felt like Jesus began to hand feed her. And she said, you know, there's two reasons that a shepherd will hand feed, you know, for two reasons. And you are living this right now. Number one is, when they see something special in that lamb and they want to cultivate it, or when it's injured or it has a need and it needs that assistance and recovery time. So, and so you're hand feeding right now because you've got a baby that's been rejected.
Right.
So, you know,
and then we also have to sometimes, and it's funny because you're right. I mean, we have to hand feed the baby because if we didn't nourish him, he would die. He wouldn't get any nourishment. But we also have to feed the mother, one of the other mothers. We also have a new mom who just had a baby who's also taking care of that baby. But we have to give her extra grain.
Right.
And so we have to give her her own feeding station, and because they will just butt right in and eat her food.
Take her food, right.
So that's why they hand fed them, to keep all the other sheep from getting that.
Right. So that I think would be, you know, something special, you know, or injured. I don't want to say injured because the new mom isn't necessarily injured, but you see that there's like, you know, there's some extra special circumstances.
She needs to make more milk. Yeah.
Right.
So so Shalom Stewart.
Shalom Stewart joining us today. So Terry was definitely experiencing a time where she was being hand fed, you know, and you know, in her case, it was definitely, she felt injured and betrayed, and she needed, you know, her shepherd to hand feed her and give her that extra sustenance that she needed to rebuild that strength, and to rebuild the wall, you know. And I can relate it even back to Kelly. You know, Kelly needed that special, you know, she had a special assignment that she had prayed for to be in the mission work, and she had work to be done, and she needed her shepherd to hand feed her as well, to you know, continue fighting the good fight. So yeah.
And it is a special thing because I think that you may not know it during the battle or during the hardship, but after the hardship, you know, you've been hand fed. You know that you were given that special attention, because you can feel it, and you understand then what that feeling was and what that felt like. And so it's very cool.
So as I said, I like to turn this around and kind of make it apply to, you know, the body of Christ as a whole. You know, I definitely can see how it applies to me as a wife and a mom, but on page 82, I kind of leave this little analogy about, you know, when we're married, and think about it too, as we join a church, you know, as we come into a family. And the reason I'm talking about this is because the word chuppah, which is the marriage canopy for the Jewish wedding, begins with a chet. And het looks like a chuppah. If you stand it up, if you look at it, you've got the two
Yeah.
barns, the canopy across the top. And so, when we build and think about this for our marriage and how we enter into a marriage, but also think of it how it applies to all the different people, personalities that enter into the body of Christ. Okay. When a brand new home is built, free of flaws, never used, and the family moves into it, it's perfect, right? We've got nothing to worry about because everything has been taken care of. Like, not many of us get to do that. But what happens when someone moves into a dilapidated fixer-upper, right? It's riddled with foundation problems, crooked walls, roof is in shambles. It's going to take significant work to create perfection. We all enter marriages. We all enter into the body of Christ in some form of imperfection. We are never free of flaws. When that couple enters the chuppah as individuals, but it leaves as a unit because the Spirit of God is hovering. And that's that little line that crosses above the chuppah. They believe that the Spirit of God hovers over them. Our homes and our families, our body of Christ will never wholly resemble perfection because we're all fixer-uppers. And our restoration is only possible through the grace of God. And so not only rebuilding walls, walls can be used to separate, you erect walls of separation, but also walls of protection. We need those walls of protection, and we need those walls of refuge as well. So
if we go back to page 77, you wrote at the top here, Terry began to understand how intentional Satan is when his target is set.
Right.
She adds, what a victory it was for the enemy to take out 4 people and 2 marriages with one blow.
Exactly.
And she said, we were all believers, and he took us out of ministry, destroyed their marriage, and nearly took out ours at all. And you can see that obviously there wasn't a forgiveness because, what if Terry hadn't forgiven her husband?
Right. 2 marriages completely destroyed.
Yeah. And all of that ministry work that they had put in. And so the wall here, the walls were the protection, but now the wall and the foundation has to be forgiveness.
Yeah.
And without forgiveness, there's no rebuilding.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly.
And we talked a little bit about that in Bet, how, Samantha, dealing with very much the same situation.
Right.
Realized there were areas in her wall through which the enemy was able to gain a foothold and destroy.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But it is amazing.
It is. So they're still married. They've got, I think they have 3 or 4 children. I'm not sure. Definitely both have been very, very active in ministry. They attend a fabulous church. One of my favorite pastors is there. I'm not going to say where it is. She actually, this is a name that I did change because she said, we have since had children. Our kids don't know anything about that. There's no reason for them to know. Like, they don't need to know that about their dad. And so, and that's part of the healing process and forgiveness. Like, this is a whole new, a whole new person that we're going to, allow to grow and to develop. But she definitely works. She works hand to hand in women's ministry in her church. She does a lot of counseling, and I'm sure, and so does her husband. And so, I can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this might have a little something to do with it.
Yeah. And you wrote here near the bottom of 82, godly life does not prevent Satan's attack.
Right.
Neither does God's restoration guaranteed shelter from future struggles.
Right. And the reason I said that, they went through teenage years with their kids, and they had additional struggles with their kids and stuff too. And their marriage wasn't threatened, but it was not an easy road. And so, that's kind of why I said I'd love to say, they lived happily ever after, but I don't think that's the case with any of us. Their marriage is strong and healthy, and they're definitely working in ministry, but we still have struggles. We still have wayward prodigal children or health issues or some kind of struggle that we definitely need to fall into that refuge, that protective wall. That
Yeah, and I think to misinform people
yeah,
that once you come to Jesus, your life will be easy and you won't have any struggles and the whole prosperity gospel. I mean, we have to be careful because
right,
no, I mean, Jesus told us that we would go through exactly what he went through. We would be hated because we followed him. We would be despised. We would have trouble. And he told the Jews they would have persecution. You know, we would
right.
all have persecution, but
Yeah,
he definitely told them they would as well. And so
especially.
we have to understand that it's not an easy and it doesn't prevent Satan's attack. It actually heightens it. So,
Right, right. So, have you ever considered yourself a hedge of protection for your family? Because really,
mm,
that's what, we're talking about, this Proverbs 31 woman, and she has to fight for her family at times. We're going to have to
mhm,
be the one that wields that sword, that Zion, and we're definitely going to have to be the ones that
mhm,
pray and
mhm,
kind of build that hedge of protection around our family. How does that apply to the body of Christ?
mhm.
As a church, are we taking time to investigate our walls? We think we have that strong foundation, and some churches that have been around for years and years, they think their foundations are strong, but are their walls high enough
Right,
to
right.
to prevent attack?
Mm,
And are they reinforced? Because walls crumble. They
mhm,
definitely are easy
mhm.
to destroy. So,
My son drives in heavy traffic in Columbus going back and
mhm,
forth to work, and I'm always praying for him and
yeah,
praying for his protection because I worry so much, you
right,
know, not all day, I don't worry like that, but
yeah,
I always think about it that I'm please, take your time, please be careful.
yeah.
And, um, and so one day he told me, he goes, "Mom, I was almost in an accident." He goes, "I got boxed in and this guy came over to my lane and I'm trying to get out of the way." And he goes, "I don't know why I wasn't hit." I said,
Mm,
I don't even know why I wasn't hit. I should have been
mhm,
hit."
mhm.
And I said, "I was praying for you." So,
Yeah.
you know,
My son, this tearing the terrible stories. My son, the first time he rode with a student driver, like that, they had a situation where he needed to ride with a kid to school band practice, and
mm,
I allowed it. I checked, like, is it okay my kid rides with your kid? I did all the things, and I just felt really uncomfortable because I knew they were coming home at night. I prayed. I mean, I prayed days, like, just keep these kids safe because they're stupid, they're teenagers.
right.
Sure enough, I mean, like, not even a mile from our home, they rolled in a ditch into a cow
Oh my
pasture. I mean,
goodness.
rolled and had upside down, had to kick out the back window. There were four of them in the car. They had to climb out the back window to get out of the car because they couldn't open the doors and everything. And when he called us, and when we showed up and drove onto the scene, they're lined up on the side of the road. They're just sitting next to each other, and none of them had a scratch on them. None of them had nothing. They all had their seatbelts on, thank God. And one of the kids that was like really starting to freak out a little bit, he's like, I can't even believe we didn't get hurt. And I'm like, dude, it's because I've been praying for you for days. Like, I covered this situation days ago
Right,
with
right.
prayer. So it doesn't, God's not always going to give us a favorable answer, but it is our responsibility to
Mhm.
always, build a hedge, build those
Yep,
walls,
yep.
and make sure they're strong, and roll up our
That's
sleeves, and
that's
not
right.
be not grow weary, but to keep our arms strong
Mhm.
so that we are not pulled away in the chaos.
That's right. Well, we're out of
We
time.
are. So we'll check you guys next week, and we'll cover the next two verses.
Yes.
So thank you for
Goodbye. Thank you.